Tres.
Buenas tardes a todos, a todas. Bienvenidos a este segunda sesión del año, del 2024, de Gobernando el Urbano. En esta ocasión tenemos el gusto de tener con nosotros visitando al profesor Dominique Bouller, que nos va a presentar. El título de su presentación es Perspectivas urbanas y ambientales de las Smart Cities, de las ciudades inteligentes. Pero bueno, antes de darle la palabra, un poquito digamos, de lo que ha hecho, de la trayectoria del profesor Dominique. Es doctor en sociología, maestro en lingüística y actualmente es profesor en el Instituto de Estudios Políticos de París y también investigador en el Centro de Estudios Europeos y de Política Comparada en SciencePo. Ha publicado numerosos artículos, libros sobre distintos aspectos relacionados de algún u otro modo a lo digital, a lo urbano, desde habitar en un mundo digital, el poder de las redes digitales, de las plataformas. Ha escrito también sobre territorio y soberanía cuando se trata, además de esta nueva capa de complejidad que es el mundo digital. Y su última publicación es un libro que suena fascinante, que está aún en francés, que aún no se traduce, que espero que se llegue a traducir. Se publicó el año pasado, que sería algo así como propagación, un nuevo paradigma. Ahí está, un nuevo paradigma para las ciencias sociales. Así que es un gusto. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much. The floor is all yours.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you all. Disculpe por no hablar español. But I try to improve. I promise. So, yeah, my presentation will be about the kind of connection between the urban issues and digital ones. And I will start from a very high level. I would say high level in terms of governance and size of the issues, not very ethnographic or not very local size type of issues. So that's why I started from the point of smart cities. I've been teaching this kind of topics for 15 years and more in the urban school at SciencePo. And it's an interesting opportunity to understand how we can handle a much more difficult area of concern that are the digital world than the urban one, because the urban one is very complex, as you know, but the digital one is much more complex because you don't have the lever to govern that as it is in cities. Sometimes you may believe that you can govern something in cities. I think sometimes you're not right, but here in the digital world, things are propagating much more than we thought, much more than we expected. So that's why we're facing all the troubles in which we are now in talking about social media, for instance. But I will not speak of that a lot. I will very much focus on the issues related to the governments and to the strategic choices that are made by the governments, local governments, and the companies that are involved in providing the services in these large cities. Of course, I will not speak about rural areas and all the other issues. There are many of them. I will really focus on large metropolis. That's maybe interest in my research. So I will use a kind of what I call a compass, that I designed in the Bruno Latour's office, because I've been working with Bruno Latour for years, that he passed away last year. And the idea of attachment and detachment is coming from his own work on the modern view of the world, the fact that traditional societies are really concerned of maintaining attachments to the whole environment. That's why it's very important for the ecological part of the issues that we will deal with. And attachments mean that people would like to keep on maintaining traditions, and they don't want to get rid of that. And a large part of the people are pushing in this sense, but everybody is sometimes involved in this for some area of concern. Some areas you want to get more detached, and others you want to, I would like to maintain this kind of choices that I've been used with. And the detachment process is really the modern stance on the world, trying to make people get out of their traditions, get out of the roots that they may feel for the national part, for the ethical, for the I would say all the relationships and so on. So that's really a tension. Doesn't mean that I put any value on one or another. It's the tension that we're experimenting. And on the other side, we have the tension related to the science and the progress of science, where the question of uncertainty is getting more and more, not just a kind of externality of the research, because a lot of people are waiting for science to deliver certainties, to make sure that there are facts. That's it, but don't get into controversies. There are facts, and then we can move on. But then now science in its own activity is including a lot of uncertainty as a paradigm within it. Quantum physics, for instance, is very most famous for that. But I think it's very important to understand that this is the works of Isabel Stengers that inspired me for that. And so I make this kind of compass just to try to develop and to describe the various positions that people can adopt, individuals, groups, governments, whatever you want, companies, and so on, when they're facing any choice. So it's just a way to tell people that when you are entering the digital world, there's no such a thing as a train on the same track and no choice to make. That's exactly the way usually we present the digital innovations. That it falls down. We were discussing on ChatGPT at lunch, and then that's it. ChatGPT fall on you, and then you have to follow track and try to not to miss the train. But the problem is that there are many different ways to do all the digital innovation that we are facing, including AI, including GPTs, because there are GPTs, various ones. And so that's a way to reintroduce the possibility of a choice, which is very important. It is the basis for the policy. If you do have a policy that is just following the tracks that others have been favoring, well, there's no policy anymore, and no politics at all, no debates and so on. So that's why I wanted, and this is how I train my students, always to observe, to extract from a specific issue all the potential solutions and choices, even though they don't share them, even though they don't agree with that. But that's a good opportunity for us to open the possibilities of choice. So that's why. Oh, yeah, okay. No, I would do that with this. So there is the kind of historical compass first. First is it's the traditional, and specifically in Mexico, I think you understand what I mean, the sacred city, with something where you have attachments, certainties, and there is this is a centrality. One of the functions of the city is always to deploy, to demonstrate the centrality of the power, centrality of the relationship with gods, with ancestors, and so on. So there is a very important aspect of cities. And the other aspect was the one of accessibility, and these two features have been developed by Henri Lefebvre, who is a famous French scholar on urban issues. And I try to make it presented this way because the other part of the marketplace is also a very important one. And sometimes both are being aggregated in the history, but sometimes not. You have marketplaces that are not really central in terms of fortified or sacred city. But now this is a traditional view of how the cities have been combining accessibility and centrality. But there is another feature now that should be considered as almost as important in how cities has to be governed is connectivity. And connectivity is something that didn't exist before, And that's why I call the city as flows of data and opinion movements, and something that is not really so easily grasped, because you don't have concrete buildings, made of concrete. You have all these flows that you don't know where they are. You are floating in the middle of that, but the opinion part is becoming a very important issue for the local governments, city governments. They are understanding now more and more that they are a part of a reputation that they have to handle all over their country or all over the world, because metropolises are living in some kind of competition that I don't really buy this kind of analysis, but all over the world. And my point is to say that, well, if we are not in a position to say, well, this is right, this is wrong, we just have to try to understand how we can recompose the various features and the qualities of each of the cities that I mentioned before. That's why we designed, as with Boudreau, we called it a cosmopolitical composition process. We call that the composition process. He wrote papers on that, and I was the editor-in-chief of a journal called Cosmopolitique. And that's so you have these images, for instance. This is Avignon. This is a French-centered presentation. This is Rungis, which is the large logistics center close to Paris. And you have this instance, for instance. I will show you what it is. You see, this is the kind of vision that we can have for a city when we want to show the connectivity feature of it. You have all the data from the video recording, from the temperatures, the traffic, and so on. And you have, look at the downside of the right down part of the screen. You have immediate reaction extracted from Twitter, for instance, and you say, well, London, this is for London. London, 12 people, Londoners, are unhappier than the average people in England, And so you got it time from almost in a second, you have all this movement. That's a part of it. It's rather strange, but you are measuring the mood of the people in the city, Of course, it's completely an artifact. It has been shaped by all the properties and the choices made by the platforms. But that's interesting. That's exactly the kind of thinking that some leaders of large metropolis may have in their mind, saying, well, how people feel compared to others. You would say, as you are a specialist of urban planning, you would say, well, we don't care a lot. We have so many more serious problems. But the problem can be a real issue when you want to make a decision and to transform an environment for a specific transportation system, for instance. And if the people do not agree, you will feel it. And you know that you have to anticipate some kind of that. So just to show you what it means. Okay, and then you have, I'm sorry, I'm moving too fast. No, not so fast. Revealing everything in my presentation. Okay, so what I will do, so I can use the same compass in order to describe what are the various policies that are available for smart cities policies. You know that the term smart cities itself was coined by IBM. It was tried to be, it didn't manage to make it, to monetize it as such. So it was really largely extended and used later. But what I say is, here you see that there is a kind of reference that we must have, which is traditional city, what I call the good old city, where people are used as sensors, That's why we are always fascinated when we see political leaders going on the markets, and trying to shake hands with the people. It's about, it doesn't make sense. They have all the technology in order to know how the people feel, Well, not so sure, not so sure. There is something specific in this kind of connections, and we should not get rid of that, because at the moment they will be just managing dashboards, and in order to know how the people work, there might be some trouble, So there is still this kind of connection, but we'll not discuss that. The first smart city that is really the key point for the modernization of the vision of the city is what I call the IBM city, because this is how they design it. There are other companies like Cisco, ZTE, which is a Chinese company. Sorry?
Google as well, right?
Google, no. That's interesting because you will see the next step of the presentation. Google is a different square, you know.
Okay.
That's why this is why I call the Google City, you see, on the top. That's exactly the point, you know. IBM City will show you what it is. It's based on models, or make it simple. I will explain it later. But you have also now a data city, what I call a Google City, where you have much more uncertainty, you see, and you can correlate everything, whatever it is, the kind of traces that you can obtain, because there is a huge capacity of calculation, and with the big data and the machine learning technologies. And this is a different way of considering the city. You know, that's very important for me to make a distinction. We'll try to explain it. And then we still have Wikicity, referring to Wikipedia, which is one of the major works created by the human beings on the internet, that's Wikipedia. And this one is based on the contribution of everybody, of the citizen contribution. And that's a kind of what I call, and some others call that with me, platform cooperativism, where people are supposed to contribute. And this is a very different philosophy, a very different ways of considering how we handle the various issues related to the city. Let's see, what are we talking about? We're starting from very basic equipments going digital, you see, street lighting, okay? And I think you're familiar with that because you got all this puntos, all that. You are really, Mexico is a very good city for that. You are really familiar with that already. And then you start this very low level local system, and you move to the central management platforms. The problem being that who has the digital expertise? You know? Is it the companies that are running that, or is it somebody else? Is it the computer scientist within the staff, or some part of the staff? What kind of expertise do we have? So we are facing something that I will get back later, what Susana Zuboff called a division of learning, which means that some people, some companies, some entities, some organizations are learning much more than others from the extraction of sources of data, of traces, and so on. So beware of that, because this is a real critical issue for local governments, how the cities themselves are still learning about the data that they are collecting, or are they still just providing the data for the platform to learn for themselves and their own business, you know? Well, that's a real issue. We are still in the situation where we don't know exactly where it works. And of course, you are very familiar with C5, where there is, which is on the video, they said, más grande in America Latina. So, it's really significant and very important that you already have this experience that I don't know precisely. I must confess that I didn't do any empirical work on that. You know. So some of these policies, let's get back to this compass and start with the first one, which is IBM City. So you have mentioned Cisco's ZTE, you have the Dassault system that made wonderful visualization of cities and so on, 3D ones. This is based on models and centralization. I will explain how. So the IBM City was supposed to be a city command center with all the data from all the kind of activities that you have, not only security issues, and not only traffic issues, but also water management, sewage, waste management, whatever you want. You know, you have all this that is supposed to be aggregated in the same command center. You know. And this is the most famous realization of that was the command center in Rio for the World Cup and the Olympic Games, you know. So they managed to sell their protocols and their systems to Rio. That's very important. And so you see, you feel like you're in Houston, you know, there's all this screens here. Remember that, in fact, it was in Chile. We had this experience in the Allende government by Fernando Flores. I know him personally, and made him talk about that. On all utopia, where you had in 72, you know, you are supposed to have a cybersyn ops room where you would have all the data flowing and the area kind of scientist government, you know, because that's really interesting. It wasn't during the Allende government. That's it. What just archaeology. It was not really implemented in the end. So in fact, for smart cities, you have no limits for this kind of concept. You see, you can address transport and mobility issues, healthcare ones, public security, electric utility, water utility, waste management, citizen services, sustainable development, and so on. The only place where you can approach that capacity of aggregating everything is in Singapore. Real ones, I mean, where it works in some ways. Of course, people usually do not mention that Singapore is a specific kind of state, you know. It's a city state, and it's not far away from the dictatorship, you know. So you need to understand that if you want to plan this kind of use of the technology, the best regime that you may have is moving toward the dictatorship a little bit, you know, not only a little bit, sometimes seriously, you know. So that's really important to have in mind, you know. There's another display of that. Or the other way is to say, well, we just have to build a city from scratch. That's quite easier, you know, much easier, you know, because the problem is not the city as such, it's the old city and the old inhabitants, you know. If you just create a city from scratch, perfect, no problem at all. I visited in South Korea, Songdo, you know, where it is a strange city, you know, where you have a small kind of Venice, you know, some kind of a small replication of others, you know, it's a kind of fake city, which is rather strange. Not so lively, of course, nothing just related to Mexico City, of course. And on the other side, you have Masdar City, which is supposed to be the green city, the fascinating one, the green lab, but they build a city, and then maybe they try to attract people to live in, you know, that's a very strange way of building cities, you know, without inhabitants, you know. And the worst one is Neon the Line in Saudi Arabia, northwest. You see, this is one line, 170 kilometers long. And you will have a city on one line with all the transportation system underground and all this. That's kind of the top-down view of the world. And again, it works only in this kind of regime that is Saudi Arabia, you know, and in the desert. That's the best place, you know, to face no problem, except the fact that it will be a huge technical problem, but that's it. So what is interesting is that this first kind of city, smart city by IBM, in fact, it didn't convince local governments. It was only sold to Rio as an integrated operation center. And now we're moving into more specialized information systems. They admitted, IBM admitted, and they were not naive about the urban environment, because remember that this company has been the one who developed the digital technologies for the local governments for 80 years, you know, before that ICE 400, you know, there was the huge, large computers that were used in all governments all over the world, you know. A long time ago, 40 years ago. But they focused on crime, for instance, in New York City, in Madrid, on traffic in Stockholm, and Cisco focused on Songdo, on a very kind of strange replication of that. In Dijon, we had companies, Bouygues and Suez, that aggregated some features of services, and that's it. And in Mexico, we have Telmex and Thales that built this C5 with traffic security and emergency issues, but not very far away from this kind of issues, you know. So it's much more specialized area, you see. So the vision of the whole system governing all aspects of social life and environmental life in the city, it failed. It failed. That's very important to know. And now they are moving into collaboration with more urban companies. We have a French one, which is called Veolia. She's famous because they are really expert in urban issues for specific kind of issues, you know, water, sewage, and so on. But the problem is now, IBM, this is very interesting, that the large and very powerful digital companies, they are facing the complexity of urban systems that they didn't consider before, you know. Now, it's really, really complex, not so much in technical terms, but in political terms. And of course, when you do data science and computer science, you don't want to get into political issues. You have no expertise in that. And the more you can get rid of that, the best it is, you know. And that's exactly what they're facing now in urban systems, which is kind of good news in some ways, you know. So we need to still help people that will compose things, you know, and adapt that. The way they work is that in reality, this is a very, what we call usually the symbolic AI, you know. AI, symbolic AI means that you build a model to describe the world. We build ontologies. We describe all the features, all the roles, all the status, all the various situations that you may face, and you put it in a model. That's exactly what we do. I used to do that in aeronautics, for instance, because there was a kind of an AI. It was a symbolic one, but it worked with some limits. But you had a lot of description, very low-level description of everything. And of course, everybody was, even social scientists, it was quite easy for us to criticize them, to say, well, you are reducing the world, because whenever you put people or situations in some tables, in fact, you miss a lot of experience, a lot of moments of situations. So, of course, you will face trouble. But in the aeronautics, they managed to make it not so badly, because they were able to discipline everybody, from the builders of the aircraft to the pilots and to everybody, to everything, every process, because it's really an environment where everything is controlled, and that doesn't exist in any city. You cannot find any place where you can control everything and tell people how they must behave. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So the problem was how we can adapt the behaviors to the models, and this is exactly what happened in Rio. They had to retrain the experts and the people on the field just to tell them, no, now you should not now do the emergency services this way, because the models cannot handle that, so you should go through these processes. That's not something which is really that will please a lot for the experts. You say, well, so we don't know anything? Our expertise is not worthwhile at all? That's a real problem. That's why it failed in the end. And then we have eaten too far. Now we see this extension, and we say, well, at the moment we'll have more and more sensors, like in the Internet of Things. Well, we will have a model that will be much more complete, so it will be better than that. In fact, no, there was still the same problem. And I must mention, and I will just mention it right now because I'm not sure I will have time to get deeper into that after. So what kind of connection do we have when we do that with what I call organizational design? Which means this is not just a question of performance of the technology, of excellence of the technology. It's how it's coupled and encapsulated within organizational activities and traditions and routines and knowledge and so on. So that's a real issue. I just tell you where it comes from, this idea. I made a comparison between the traffic police in France and in England, specifically. And I was struck by the fact that the way that people worked was so different, In France, when people do the speed control, the policemen do the speed control, they are assigned one position in the street, and they have to stay there for 2 hours. So they stop, give a flash, and that's it. But they know that 20 minutes after, everybody knows that there is a car hiding there. And so all the cars are flashing between themselves and then giving my soul. But they say, well, we know that there's no use staying there. But we have to stay. We have to stay because the prefect had told us to stay 2 hours. That's it. And so you got all the data flowing like that. You have all the data. And they send it to the central organization in France and in Paris. And then no information get back. What did you do? How were you performing and so on? Nothing to learn from that. It was always sent to the center. And then when I get to the English traffic police, it was specialized traffic police. And what they do is that they're organized by county. And the county traffic police, they collect the data from the alcohol issues, accidents of any kind, speed controls, and they collect them themselves it was 20 years ago, on a small computer. And there is a guy who is not a computer scientist, but trying to make correlations, trying to say, well, maybe there is a relationship between the fact that there are accidents there and the speed control is made in this place. Maybe the hour of the exit of the pubs makes sense. We should reduce that. So they test everything. they do that locally. And in the end, the data are sent centrally, but in the beginning, they learn with the data themselves. The data are embedded in their organizational design, which is very specific and very different from the French one. It's just to make you feel how there is a very different way to handle data depending on the kind of organizational choice that you make. And that's why when you do it, sometimes people will get empowered, as we say, they will learn, or sometimes they will not. It will be what I call about the learning, the division of learning will be completely different. And it makes a great difference in the end on the acceptability of that, on the innovation process, on the fact that the body itself, the government itself is reactive or not, because if the experts, people on the field are not really interested and really motivated to collect the data and to understand what they're doing, of course, they just do the job as a routine basis, not with no contribution as such. So let's take the opposite part, which is Google City. Google City is a very different situation because it's not based on models. Remember that. That's what we call connections AI. Connectionist AI is based on the fact that you aggregate a large number of data, here traces of behaviors of any kind, you aggregate them from various sources, you don't care, and you aggregate that, and you test correlations. And the more correlation, the more data you have, the more chances, the more probabilities, because it's based on probabilities, the more probabilities you will validate in order to anticipate and to predict some kind of behavior. So that's the velocity of traces that is really the key point. It's a very different philosophy from the point of data science, but it makes a very different situation for the rest as well. You know that Google Maps is not just a fancy application, it's really a core business for Google. And it's very important for urban management, of course, because maps are really the only significant way to aggregate data from various sources in the same referential, which is the map. Okay. And this is where Google is so powerful. Everything gets referenced for any reason, for marketing issues and so on. But what they do is they do what we call data to model, which means that they extract the data. They don't know exactly what is the validity of that. They extract it, they compare, they test it, and so on. And in the end, they build a model. They test the model. They test the patterns that they can detect. And due to their large knowledge of every set of data everywhere, in the end, they got very good prediction of behaviors. That's what they do for your route, for governing your route in the Google Maps or in Waze and so on. So data flows will generate knowledge and revenues for them. So it's a data to model approach. And this is a way to learn. This is what is very powerful because they need to learn. And during the flows of data, they improve the model themselves. And the models do it automatically. They don't need to be revised. Models know how to learn and to improve their own capacities. So the revisions themselves are very powerful for that. So they use it for augmented reality. They use it for ways. Google Business is really now able to tell somebody who's walking in the street that there is a shop, that's interesting for you guys, not only the fact that you have windows that you can observe, which is a signal to attract the consumer, but now that you have a signal that there is a shop inside the block, there is no window. So it will change so many things for the marketing of space, in urban space. Now they are able to deliver a message to tell people, look at this, there is a shop inside the block. So, but the problem is that this is really a way of collecting expertise for themselves as a company. It's an unclosed knowledge, no sharing at all with anybody. That's really a real issue. They learn, and companies and business around them or local governments do not learn a lot with that. That's why it's very important. So you can have applications of the Pokemon Go as a great facility. To the point where you lost your expertise, that you lose your expertise. This is exactly what happened with the GPS. This is in Denver, Colorado. You have this situation where people were following the tracks given by a GPS, and everybody, 200 cars stuck into the mud in the middle of the field of nowhere, and that's the moment you say, well, but no one in this group was just thinking that it cannot be serious, there is a problem. We are facing south, and we were supposed to go north or something like that, we are in the field, but we're supposed to meet a lake or something else. No, nothing, no maps at all, just the devices from us. Yes. It's a very significant situation where we lose our own capacity. Of course, people will say, no, I'm not at that time, no. This is kind of guys. Yes. But the problem is in fact, using more and more this kind of technology, very smart ones, you lose your previous capacities. There's no way to escape that. We will lose something. And of course, the problem is not to say, well, so get back to the maps or paper maps or printed maps and so on. No, we got this. Okay, but how can we get in control of that? How far can we go in just delegating to the machines all our knowledge? There is a real issue. That's a real issue. And of course, it's a very local example, But this is exactly what happens in cities, How far can we go in delegating the expertise to another company, which is completely refusing to share anything? And you, as a service, as a department in an urban government, you will lose your expertise. Might be a real problem in the long term. At first, that's so many benefits that you say, well, I don't care. But the next step may be really cruel in some ways. And then, yes, that's the case for that we do both coordinates. Platforms are benefiting from the behavioral surplus. They aggregate all your behaviors, and they monetize it for their own service. Just the other experience, which is really close to the IBM city, as I mentioned before, the smart cities in Rio. This is how Google pushed its vision to the point of the experiment in Toronto. You may have heard about that, the sidewalks experiment in Toronto, where they were supposed to build an experimental area where they could build the city with this very limited, very small blocks. Not blocks of city, but blocks of apartments that they would put each week or each month or each week. They will be able to change the functionality of the space. So an office, a shop, an apartment, and back and forth, and every week or every month you can change that because you have all the infrastructure that is designed to govern the city at a very finely grained level, not just urban planning as we used to do 20 years at least, and say there will be the business there, the offices there, the commerce and shops there. No, here you can move it depending on the data that you collect. That was their project. The same for the streets, where you can move and change the use of the street from hour to hour. This is just for bikes. Then they will accept taxis. Then you will accept collective transportation and no pedestrian anymore or whatever. You change it from hour to hour because they collect the data at a very finely grained level from your own smartphone, of course, what you are doing, the speed of moving and so on. And that's what they wanted to do. The problem is that they failed. That's interesting. That's interesting. What can we learn from that? You see, the opposite model from IBM, from the models that will go top down, we say, well, not so, it could have been expected. But this, they failed, even Google failed. What happened? In fact, first, citizens didn't appreciate a lot the kind of surveillance because it means that it's pervasive. You must collect all the data and the traces of behavior because your models will be performing better as long as you collect the large number of data, large amount of data. Then they do not trust large platforms, GAFAM, as we say in France, to rule a city. They say, no, we do not become Google city in some ways. And the problem for Google is that when they get into the urban business, they understood that if they want to adapt to make it work and make it a profitable business, because it's not just data, it's building, it's streets, concrete, the design, and so on. They had to extend the area. So they didn't want to have all this very small area of the demonstration. They asked to to increase the number of acres of their experiment to a point where the government, local government of the city said, well, we are delegating 1/3, not 1/3, 1/10 of the city to Google. That's not something we can accept. The government itself was completely challenged by this power and Google learned something. It means that when you want to get into the urban design, you must make something that is balanced in terms of budget and so on. And so it's much more complex than just providing data with no infrastructure at all, at least. So the government instead understood that Google would become the urban expert instead of them, because all the data that they will collect, they will not send it back to the governments. And in fact, what they learn is that in fact, urbanism and city government is much too complex, even for an AI system of that kind, which is another lesson from the other side, from the depending on what kind of AI you adopt, it's still the same problem. Urban systems are very complex, very highly complex, to a number of parameters that it's not millions of hundreds of millions and millions of parameters, billions of parameters. It's much more complex because it's a political issue, because there is conflicts, there are contributions, there are controversies and so on. And that they don't want to get into that. So, sorry. No, back. No. No. So just to give you an idea, another kind of compass, maybe it's abusive, but some use. But remember that when we talk about intelligence, everybody is really advocating intelligence. The conventional wisdom is one, the traditional one. You say, well, we should. Some of the old people living in the traditional areas, they know better than others. Okay, well, why not? It's a kind of intelligence as well. It has its own relevance. Do not discard it. Do not discard it. Then you have the guys who think about models, the other one that think about predictive correlations, and you still have to discover how collective intelligence itself is able to contribute to the city. And this collective intelligence has a specific feature that it is contradictory, which means that there is not somebody or some collective, some computing center that can deliver the answer, solution. No, it's always contradictory. And that's something that we are not usually ready to accept as such. That's why I use the term of Ben Green, who wrote a book called Smart Enough Cities. And I think it's a very interesting expression. Smart enough cities. Don't try to get too far and let people believe that there's something more intelligent than anybody somewhere. First, address complex problems rather than solve artificially simple ones. When you simplify everything, of course, it's quite easy for artificial intelligence or any kind of system. Complex problem, you must address them, and then you will have to face all the various features of that. Implement technology to address social needs and advance policy rather than adapting goals and values to align with the technology. You got the technology, and then you have to adapt your own values and vision to that. That's exactly the contrary of a political vision. That's a risk in this kind of techno push that we are experiencing. Third point, prioritize innovative policy and program reforms above innovative technology. The problem is that, exactly that, you've got an innovative technology, but the way you govern, the way you contribute, the way you organize the services and so on, is sometimes very weakly innovative, nothing more. That's exactly the fad that we had about the delivery of groceries, for a quarter of hour. We had in Europe, it was everywhere. The new grocery stores that are dark stores, as we say, and a platform that will sell whatever you want to call in 15 minutes. You got what you want. But the problem is that they had to reduce that to aperitif stuff, olives, or whatever that's it. It was really stupid and it failed. Now all these companies are in the span of time of 4 or 5 years, they're collapsing. They raise a lot of money, and then they are demonstrating that they have no innovation, no service innovation at all in what they are offering. And then develop, ensure that the technology design and implementation promote democratic values, which mean not letting and exploiting people as Uber does, for instance. and then develop capacities and processes for using data with municipal departments, which means creating the aggregation of intelligence that we already have and making them learn from these technologies. And that's, I think, that's Ben Green that wrote that, but I completely agree with what he said. And then I will need to stop because it's maybe too late. No, it was part of the Wiki City, And then in the Wiki City, you have this example of OpenStreetMaps. You may have heard of it, of course, where they build, for instance, the bus routes from OpenStreetMaps in Chennai. The kind of contribution to the public services with cyclic fix, when you can call for any kind of repair that you want to alert the government of that. Departments, urban departments ready to do that. What we call complaining apps. There are many of them everywhere. And I think in Mexico you have something which is not so far from that. No. But you know that the reference, well, this is why I call it Wikipedia, because Wikipedia, you have historical list of what has been said, and there is discussion. And this is very important. That is something that you will not find in any AI system that we are now selling everywhere. They want to give you answers. They want to give you no exploration tools. They just want to say, well, that's it. You got to go to a good answer. And Wikipedia is so good for that because you keep the track of everything. So you can get back and you can observe the debate taking place. That's what we should have learned from Wikipedia for a lot of public policies. And then those moments where the public debates, and the city in the Hispanic world is very famous and expanding everywhere in the world. That's a very interesting platform. And that's where we can try to design platforms where people can contribute for real issues and not just for the sake of communication. So just the last point here will be that the fact that we must develop tools that will be adapted to different forms of democracy. There is not only the representative democracy, there is a kind of what I call technocratic democracy, which is rather strange. Political scientists will not accept that. But this is exactly how democracy works now. Referring to experts all the time. COVID was a good situation for that, but not only COVID, for everything. And the government saying, well, this is the expert power of deciding, and it's too complex for the people to decide. So let the expert decide. That's exactly the kind of democracy in which we're living. That's why at this time, as we are facing in Europe, many people say, well, what is the interest of voting for people, since we do know that they are not expert in the field that they are addressing? In the end, it will be always the same that will make the decisions. Direct democracy, which is experienced now with the social media environment, it's completely, the public sphere has been broken up by the intensity of the reactivity that is implemented in the platforms. And then there is another one. This is what Calum and Latour used to call dialogic democracy, which means collective exploration of issues with all stakeholders. That's something really, that's what our journal Cosmopolitique was built around, trying to improve and invent processes for people to explore the processes, explore the issues, and so on. I must say that it was completely utopian. It was in 2000, and with the economic crisis, with the financial crisis in 2008, I think we understood that that will never happen, because there's so huge interest in financial ones that are putting so much money in saving the banks, for instance, that all the real problem that we may have, there will be no money left for that. And of course, you can make people dialogue and discuss everything, but if there are no resources, it's over. So now we are really pessimistic on this kind of a solution. And then you see that you have various devices, digital devices, that can help develop this kind of democracies. That was the last point I wanted to show you, to see that there is a plurality of technologies, that you must choose the kind of technology you want, depending on the kind of democracy you want to improve. And all of them are at their interest. I don't mean that the direct democracy is stupid. If you got only direct democracy, that's very dangerous. But some part of the direct democracy might be interesting. And there are digital tools for local governance as well. And that's it. I stop there. If you need to get into more specific and empirical issues like reputation, security, waste, and mobility, I have some sequels that can be proposed. But I think I spoke already to. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Dominique. Perdón, gracias. Thank you, gracias. Ahora tenemos también el gusto de contar con Luis Enrique Mendoza, quien va a comentar la presentación, algún texto que también compartió Dominique. Luis Enrique es profesor de cátedra y miembro adjunto del Grupo de Investigación, Desarrollo, Territorial, Sostenible en el Tecnológico de Monterrey. Es maestro en filosofía por la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México y doctor en urbanismo también por la UNAM, con una tesis titulada Vivir entre lo real y lo virtual, muy, digamos, muy pertinente para lo que discute Dominique hoy. Así que, Luis Enrique, gracias. Bueno, más o menos, sí, 20 minutos, sí.
Thank you very much for this organizing. It's hard to know where to start. Smart cities is not like a growing tendency in the world. We're trying to, I think part of the human behavior is trying to control things. We try to control and make everything as clear as possible for us. I can remember when many of you are too young, 30 years ago, when your car gets broken, you open the hood and you try to fix the car. Today, you open the hood and you say, "Oh my God, everything's closed." You can understand that. And I think that is one of the problems today with that. I'm sure that we have the ability to collect a lot of data. In fact, I love movies, so I understand, sometimes I understand the city as matrix. Do you remember this movie? We are, for matrix,
Yeah.
we are a big amount of data being collected somewhere. I don't know where, somewhere. And we can have a lot of information about us, about the city, how everything works. But as Dominique pointed, the problem is not to collect data, is do we have really the ability, chance? Are we able to process all this data? When you show us the SciencePo can collect the activity of the city. But you have one person watching the screen for 8 sectors. The other 20,000 of sectors, he doesn't know what's happening. I mean, sometimes we don't have now we don't have this ability to process all this information. There's too much information inside these times. We produce more information than many of the centuries before, but we cannot process. And part of the problem with that also mentioned by Dominique, is sometimes we believe that data, if there's come from a computer, is moving something certain. There is a certainty that is true. And it's not true. In fact, in Wikipedia, there are correctors, because you can put information that is not correct. And there are people that is checking that, okay, somebody changed things. So not because it comes from the computer, it's true. But in government, most of the time we said, okay, here's the data. The data says that. If the data says that, it must be true. But the problem is, it comes again. Okay, I'm not questioning the data. The point is, did you really make a good interpretation of that information? Part of the problems that we in smart cities comes with algorithms. these algorithms process most of the information we cannot do. But it has been proved that these algorithms can lose their equality or their no difference between areas of the city, gens or kind of people. So sometimes some of these algorithms, for example, for some asks for fast food, if you ask this asks for fast food, the algorithm says no, you cannot bring food this place because we have been robbed there. So it makes an exclusion of your area. So we believe that, okay, the computer say that, the algorithm say that, but it can also have a tendency. We sometimes, it happens to us here in Mexico City, you can use an application to drive. You say that, okay, there's a lot of 200 cars parking in the middle of nowhere. But sometimes when you put these applications, you start driving. I'm not sure if your case, when something is, I say, okay, I need to keep the route because I don't have any idea where I am. So if I try to change the route, I'm not sure where I'm gonna end. So, okay, if it says here, keep the route, you need to keep it because there are places in the city you don't know where you are. Yeah. In fact, again, for example, this application like Google Drive, Waze, give you the fastest way to arrive from one point to another. But it doesn't mean that it's the shortest route or the safest route. Sometimes it can bring you to retain yourself. Yeah. Okay, keep moving. Okay, now. So not all the data. The data is just information. But how do we proceed with this information to make it clear to the people, to understand it to the people, make understand it to the people? Another point I want to comment is about you mentioned Songdo in Korea. Songdo is like the contemporary example of Brazilian, the modernism. Yeah. In the modernism, they say, okay, the modernism says that we need to keep these Le Corbusian principles of working, living. So let's make a city with these principles. The problem is that we believe that humans are rational and not. We are not rational. Some years ago, I cannot remember the name of this person. He won the Nobel Prize in Economy. He was a psychologist. And he said, okay, according to the economists, if you don't have money, you need to save money to have, and when you save enough money, you can do things. But the truth is not. When you don't have money, what do you use? What do you do with your money? You buy things because that makes you feel that you can afford things. You don't feel that you don't have. So it's not a rationality. So that happened with Brazilian. People try to look for what is best for them. They don't want to live 1 hour away from the workplace. It's the same in Songdo. Sometimes it's another example of smart cities. They plan the city according to this perfect idea, data city, but to put a park because the data said you need to put a park doesn't mean that people want to use that park. When you make urban planning, sometimes people say, okay, it's urban planning, okay, let's put here a park. Why? Because it's going to be used by people. Why? Just because you said so? It's not true. If people doesn't have something in this place that make them bring to this place, it's not going to work. Some places in the city use this app like Pokemon Go to bring people to this area. So in these cases, some of these apps can help you some problems. Not all the problems, but some problems. But this part of making people, Henry Lefebvre said, the urban space is made by people. It's not something you provide. It's not a flat space where you feel things. You can put just things. That's part of the problem of the urban plan developments. They say, okay, so we have this population, so according to the rules, you have to put a market and hospital. Okay. But it's not just a question of you need to put. What do you need? Okay. And the second problem is that in this perfect cities, for if we want to call it in some way, of the smart cities, you need to decide between privacy or everything working. Just like you said, in Toronto, people don't want, I mean, if you want to know that when you arrive to the bus station, you're gonna, the smart city already thought that you need to send more buses to this station, and you only need to spend 3 minutes so a bus arrives and you can, okay, perfect. Well, then you need to renounce to your privacy because these applications, these programs these softwares needs to keep tracing you. What do you do? When did you do it? In fact, sometimes somebody you are probably scared because you are talking about something and then your cell phone tells you, oh, you're talking about this. By the way, I can suggest that. So it's not that you one or another. We need to try to make a cooperation between both aspects. What are we to renounce your privacy to make cities works? Okay. And another point is that when you use data to rule the city, or to control or to understand the city, there are also facts that can help you or not help you. I was during the conference, I was thinking about this German artist, I cannot remember the name, that by using this application of Waze, he put in this small cars for that kids used to move their toys. He put 100 cells working. So he collapsed one street because the algorithm understand that there are 100 cars in this place. So this collapse, and you can see the empty street, no? So you can trust that data is always true, and you can understand that in this vision of smart cities, you can hack the data to make things change. When Google Drive, I'm not sure if Google Drive always appeared in Australia, they had to say, okay, if you see that you're leaving the city, stop trusting the application because there's a problem in the application, okay? If you're in the middle of nowhere, turn around and come back. It was true. Because people, sometimes we had too much confidence. And we are renouncing to many of the abilities we have to take decisions just because or one software said so. One last point is that something interesting about this new time of cooperation between virtual and physical is that we, the people, now have the chance to correct some problems, we see they are not working in the city. What I mean, most of the applications that are now existing now for moving the city, to rent places, to use these kind of things, have been developed by people that say, okay, I don't have a car, maybe I cannot afford a cab, but probably my friend has a car and we can share, and maybe I can give him money, I can bring it there, or hotels are too expensive, but that house is empty most of the years. Probably he can rent me the house. So sometimes we can solve problems. We have the chance that there's two ways to move the city. Bottom down when a big company government makes solutions for the people. For instance, the second opportunity is bottom up. When people start making these application software, whatever, to solve problems that the city is not giving you. Okay, so we have that chance, but that chance was her, as Spider-Man says. Every power has a responsibility. We need to take the responsibility for that. In Spain, in Canarias, with Airbnb, many people start coming to Canarias to the Airbnbs, and then these big hotels, fancy hotels, they say, okay, wait. People come to Canarias because they want night restaurants, night bars, night pubs, and whatever, and we are paying for that. But if people come to houses and not to own rooms, we're not going to keep paying for that services. So we're going to close them. And then people are not coming not only to hotels, but also to the city. And we're going to get broken. So how do we deal within both sides of making this chance to make things for in a row, and the things that are useful or bring benefits to the city? We had this problem here in Mexico City with Uber, if you remember. Okay, Uber, okay, nice, we can move, but there is a group of population, the taxi drivers, that said, hey, wait. What about us? What's going to happen with us? So I want to finish this just to try to make it statement like we need to be clear that that process must be a resource, not a solution, to solve human city problems. Okay, I think I'm time.
Thank you very much for your comments. We have about 45 minutes we have 45 minutes time to answer questions. I don't know if you would like to respond or maybe reflect immediately, or if you would like to get more questions, and then we can do different rounds of questions. And
I can do just very
Sure.
short answers, very
Yeah,
short.
no, of
And
course.
Just react to what you said, because that was very interesting, and like what you starting from the last point of the fact that you mentioned that there are many policies starting from the one of bottom up or top down. So that's exactly what my compass is about when I try to train my students regarding Uber, for instance. Uber is facing serious problem in Europe for very different reasons, including Airbnb and so on. That is what is interesting, is that when you get into the issue, when you want to really address it seriously, you must get into the specific technological choices and organizational ones and legal ones and commercial ones, and all these aspects has to be assembled. And that's why I try to, my students made hundreds of compass of that kind for very specific issues, So I will not list all of them. But what is interesting is that always they were able to discover the fact that there were other solutions that nobody really talked about, The case for Uber, for instance, where in Paris, there is a cooperative, of course, the Parisian taxis were really hated by a large part of the population. So when Uber arrived, they said, wow, you got it now. That's okay. But the problem that the consequences of that was that we didn't consider how the regulation of it was really critical for the people that work in Uber. And we didn't understand how the platform itself worked. Now we know, and this is really the kind of situation that we don't want to make all the people that have the one that earn wages to get into this position of precarity. And so. But what is interesting is that there is another solution. There was a third one, which was cooperative, that existed here in Paris for years, for 140 years at least, where the drivers were not submitted to the law of the monopoly of the great company of taxis, and not in some kind of precarious situation as it is in Uber. They were owning their own company as cooperative, So there is another solution. And so we try to push this and say, well, stop discussing black and white, and just try to invent, and not only invent, but look at what already exists, And why should we get into this bipolar discussion? There are many other solutions that are possible, but you must get into the details of the organization, of the legal aspects, of the commercial one, and so on. So that's just a point of that. Another point about the fact that what we said, the example of hacking the system, I like your example. I knew that, and you're right. It's a very interesting situation. And I think that exactly what we are now facing, the fact that all these companies are using your personal data, personal traces, more than personal data. It's just the fact that you have some little bit of behavior that can be exploited in order to make correlations. So it's not really personal data as such, not the phone number, for instance. They don't care, they don't care. They got it anyway. The problem is that in fact, they are really, what is interesting is that now we can get into the situation where they are using this without telling you that you're doing them, but now that you can do the reverse engineering and fooling the systems, as you said, by sending wrong messages, false signals, and so on. And that's exactly what the Hong Kong protesters did, when as a social movement. That was interesting because they were trying to avoid face recognition systems, and they invented systems to make signals just to make the algorithm get awry, And that's really interesting. But the problem is larger than that. It means that in order to make this systems acceptable, should be obliged to learn how to fool them. That's the only solution we have. We have no regulation resources about that. And I think that's really critical, So you need now to learn that you will live in a fake environment, that the data are using them, the companies are using your data for making some fake result, because your results, including on your Facebook page, is completely, fabricated by the algorithm. And now you should be the same. You should adopt the same behavior again, and everybody will be. And that's something we are facing with all the AI, generative AI, that are producing so much data that are completely fake, that we'll have to learn that. How can we still have some government that can have some kind of vision of what is happening, how people feel, how people live, how can we solve any kind of issue, when all the sources will be infected by so many fake systems, so many fake signals, and so on. We don't know. We're really getting high trouble. Be sure of that. And this is not really the problems of the companies learning just because at the moment they will be themselves being infected by that. How can if they solve that? Of course, they will say, well, no, there's a solution, which is more technology. More. Quite the same thing. And the last point is about the fact that you mentioned the urban planning, and so what you said. I think that's interesting when you are entering into this world of the this layers, as you said, the fact that we are living in another world at the same time. What does it mean, urban planning, when you have to challenge all the issues raised on the social media, for instance? How can you integrate that? That's a real new expertise that has to be invented, you know. And it's still, of course, the lessons that we learn from the experience mean that there's still a very solid and robust knowledge and expertise that is required when you speak about building and cities and planning routes in urban systems of any kind. But at the same time, you must say that if you want to integrate the fact that there is a feedback loop of the opinion of people, the reaction of people, that is getting very deep into our everyday activity, how can we still consider the urban planning with the traditional way that we did before? That's more an issue of propagation. That's why I just which means something with much more interest than we expected, you know. No, the problem is that we still need to add the vision, a strategic vision when we do urban planning. It's not just for the next 40 or sometimes 100 years later. But how can we handle this kind of scale of time and the fact that everything is being completely challenged not every minute, but almost, you know? So that really, I'm really, there is a lot of compassion for the people who are in charge of government cities now, because it's really hard to make things fit together with this very different size and scale of problems that we are facing.
Thank you. Okay, so ya abrimos cualquier pregunta, comentario. Hacemos una primera ronda. ¿Sí, Julián?
No.
No te debí. ¿También?
I've got a question.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is at once very my own expertise, but we all live this every day. So thinking a lot about when we talk about our work as researchers in this digital world in which we live. And it is the question of what do these tools mean, not just for governance and for all of the ethical and strategic issues that you mentioned, but also for how we produce knowledge. And I really enjoyed your compass because you focus on ontologies. Ontologies are really how we make sense of the world, right? How we see the world. Recently, I read interesting work by an Argentinian historian that I didn't know. I just remember his last name is Gallo. And he was talking about how people have conceived of the future across history according to the dominant technology of that time. And it was really interesting because, for instance, he says, with the invention of print, then the visions, the imaginaries of the future we find in the historical archives are very linear futures, utopias, right? From Thomas More to all of these utopianism. It was a very linear future because print is a linear technology. So you write from left to right, and it's a line, and there's a beginning and there's an end to the narrative. So when you think of planning the future, you're thinking of planning the perfect city because you have a very linear imaginary. And then he says, with the arrival of cinema, then the imaginaries of the future become very fragmented, because what movie does is that it presents you one image next to the other, so you can have science fiction and you can have many different imaginaries of the future that keep changing all the time, because this is what cinema, the technology, brings to us. And then he says, with artificial intelligence, we give up our capacity, to imagine the future to the algorithm or to the machine for you. And you said, Dominique, something very similar, like how it makes us stupid. We give up our human capacity to create because we trust these technologies so much. And this brings me to this reflection about our work as researchers, because what we do as researchers, especially when we do qualitative work, which is my case, is we observe the world. It's a very small part of the world, always. It's never the totality of it. And then from that data that we collect observing through interviews, participant observation, whatever methods we have, an interpretation of it. And I'm thinking these tools, these digital tools, what they give us as researchers, but it's the same what they give to people, to policymakers, is a sort of enhancement of our observation capacity. We can perceive more with these things. So with algorithm, the machine will give you a pattern that we as human beings, we cannot see that pattern. Right? So I always see these technologies as a way to kind of enhance our research and creative and imaginative capacities more than, but this also comes with dangers, of course, and ethical issues. I mean, the parallel you can make is all these discussions. There was a beautiful photo from Chile in 1972, and the design of the chairs is just absolutely beautiful. But that image, right, from the 1970s, that you can enhance human capacity to understand the world. At that time, it was through drugs. It's a bit similar. You're enhancing your capacity to collect data and to understand the worlds, in our case, the social world. But the question is, these tools not only enhance our capacity to collect data and to understand the social world and to make policy decisions, but they also change what we can see and what we cannot see. This is what the historian Gaia was saying, is that these technologies orient what we are able to imagine. And I think in many ways, it's interesting to think about it from the point of view of the philosophy of science, because it really changes not only how we make and plan cities, but it changes how we can even imagine cities. And I would like to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, no, interesting, that's right. Well, I like very much your reference to ethnography, because I was trained as an anthropologist, qualitative one, but I'm much more involved in data science now. But I always tell my students that, in fact, when you do an ethnography of a local activity or situation, you don't do only a qualitative one, you also do a quantitative one, because you do one observation, which is at least choice, you know. And of course, completely legitimate and very rich. The problem is that when you do that, you had, what is the quality of ethnography, is that you have many dimensions of the situation. You will observe, especially when you are the ideal view of the anthropologist being on an island, you know, where there's nobody, and then you spend years and exploring everything. So quantitatively, you add a lot of features with dimensions in the data science, but you have only one observation, which is that this society, this group, this small group, this situation. So you have one observation, but many dimensions. And in fact, the problem is that at the moment you will try to make a statement from that, either you adopt the fact that you just give the account of your experience, and that's fine, Okay, and then if you are a good writer and it makes, that's very interesting and people learn in different way. But if you want to get into a scientific debate, you immediately get into the question of comparison, which means that you will have to say, well, and somebody will say, well, you got only one observation, blah, blah, blah. Stop. You say, so, and it's true that anthropologists used to collect various ethnography of local situations and then try to make sense of comparisons and so on, and that's it. So what you said about the small part of the world is absolutely true, but in the end, the anthropology as such has been built on the basis of comparison and trying to validate one statement with the limitation of the methodology, but there is a real effort for that, in the end, produce models, but patterns that are really significant. The problem is that when we ask artificial intelligence to do that, to help us, and I think one thing that can be done is that they may add as many observations as they can, add observation, and quantitatively they say, well, okay, you have all this feature, you have data. That's exactly what the experience we had with Bruno Latour, and the divergence we had with Bruno Latour, because Bruno Latour was much more on this position to say, well, the digital resources must be used in order to expand the description of every bit of every piece of the world. And I know that the way he writes, so that's wonderful. That's very interesting. But the problem is that I said we created the digital, the media lab together at SciencePo. I said, well, at the moment you enter into the digital calculation requirements, you need to reduce, not just. He wrote a book called Irreductions. We need to reduce the dimension in order to make them comparable and then, if possible, computable. So I don't know, you reduce. So the problem is that we don't do the same job, and your job describing at length all the features of the situation is an important one in the scientific activity. Is the same for the second one, which is trying to find patterns, comparison, and so on. So the problem is that AI will help us doing what? Expanding the description, because they will have a large set of data. So you will have many features. I'm not sure they will do that, because the problem is that you will be the one to deliver the data sets, and the choice of data sets are really critical in order to make robust correlations. So that's the problem, But what they will do is that they will add observation. They will say, well, they will add as many observations as you want. You have no limitation at all, And the problem is that when they do that, they just don't get into the discussion of why you have the capacity of expanding some features or aggregating some features. That's exactly what we do. I did some AI activity with people in TPFL in Lausanne when I was a professor there. So we always discuss how far we can aggregate, or on the contrary, get into the details, or how far we can reduce the dimensions or extend it, etc. So that's always the discussion. For data scientists, it's just a problem of feasibility of the calculation. What is optimal, optimistic? How can we optimize that for the speed of the calculation? That's it, The problem is that it's not only that, it's also a problem of what is the validation of the expansion or the reduction of it. That's where the question of imagination is important. Because if you want to expand all the possibilities, okay, that's fine. Sometimes you can ask the artificial intelligence to do that. The problem is that when it will do that, it will only rely, even when you have all this image from missing the name of the system, DAL-E, for instance, DAL-E, which is a system of AI producing images, you know that they will produce it from some of the background that they learned from the data set that they were provided with. So you still have that, and in the end you say, well, it's not so imaginative, it's a kind of a little bit stereotype, and sometimes not. So where is it? Where is it that sometimes it pushed your extension in a very interesting way? And that's exactly what we should do in science, because usually we use correlation with a systematic, very limited set of variables with artificial intelligence, and you are allowed to test whatever dimension, whatever variables that you want. That's a good point. That's interesting here. The problem is that if you let the machine do it without any rational and any expansion, it will produce just bullshit in the end, because there's nothing really validated at each step by the background, scientific background that each of us has, and that's the problem. So that's why there is a kind of ambivalent answer to that. It can be contrary, sometimes a very stereotype imagination. Sometimes it can be a very an interesting push to open our mind, other solutions. But the problem is, how can we create, design the loop between the researcher, for instance, in case you imagine, the researcher and the system, in order to adapt it so that there is a kind of a coupling of both, so that there is still somebody in control and the background is not completely lost. Sorry for the long answer.
I wanted to express, I think, two frustration about data producing, and maybe linked to what Julian just said, but you face lots of information producing data, but I'm not sure that is the data that policymakers need in reality. I'm just thinking that when you are working on a film, there is always in this society of a lot of information, a lack of information, of crucial information. For instance, I'm thinking of urban planners that are trying to have a map in an instant of the use of the soil. How do you say in English? Land using. And it seems impossible to have this data in a moment. And so far it is difficult, in spite of all the AE system in producing data science, to have those informations that are crucial for policymakers. So that was one of the first frustration. And at the end, maybe you can have an answer about Google is producing the data and it's not good data for urban makers. And the second frustration is this multiplication of platforms to have the complaints of citizens. It's just like as if policymakers in that moment had read Canon Latour, and they want their platforms to have the complaints of the citizen, and that creates a sort of big frustration because you answer those platforms and nobody take in account these complaints. And I think that nowadays in the city, all the problem people live in the day today, it seems that the solution is a platform or answering a questionnaire, and in fact, it's just a way to get far away from your deciders and the people who may solution your issues. I think more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, that what you said about the land use is a good example, because when I was in India, for instance, I met people from companies that are providing LIDAR and radar land use systems that are really absolutely powerful, and they managed to. I remember one case, just to tell you about one case. They managed to describe for the first time a city. I didn't remember which one. It's not a large city, but it was rather important. But they managed to deliver the complete and accurate state of the land use, but at a very low level size of square feet, That was, and for the first time, when they provided that to the decision makers, and including some stakeholders of various kinds, that was the first time that the people tell them that it was the first experience, they view their own city. That's really do what you said. For the first time, they view them not just with the general, but very precise and general, moving back and forth. That's very important. The zoom effect, that is very important in the digital imaging and the GIS systems, And you got this. It made them understand that how many people are using land for farming, for water storage or whatever. So they had over everything, and it changed a lot how they were able to now think of their city. So their imagination and their political power, their empowerment was really increased by this kind of vision possibilities. What I mentioned, what I insist on that, starting from my example, is that in fact, you're absolutely right in saying that what we need is not only jumping into the new innovation proposed by any kind of startup anywhere, but just thinking of what we really need as a crucial, robust database that are really useful for the decision makers, for the policy making in general, and for the stakeholders that are really concerned with that. And that's it, the problem of how the technology and the capacities of calculation that we obtain are completely derived into some business that can be made very fast for stupid applications of services that nobody needs really, while we are not able to invest into direct investment in order to build a really robust information system that will really help decision maker to understand better what are the processes of that. And I completely agree with you. We should be in a position to, to select. For instance, in France, we have a lot of startup competitions and so on. Just the government will fund them for this and this, or capital risk as well. But the utility, the principle of what is the sense and the real use in the end, and the crucial common use of that is not coming on the top of the discussion. It's just the fact that how much money you will make in how many months, and what is the return of investment. And the problem is that while you dissipate all this energy and this intelligence into this kind of application, we lose it for very. Reminds me of a discussion with Niccolo Ponte, who was the director of the MIT 10 years ago. And he said, I'm absolutely amazed of how we fail as educators, because now our students who are trained at a very high level in the MIT, what do they care about their career now for the next step of their career? They're just trying to build the next application to sell pizza as fast as they can. And they say, we are the MIT, we got the best intelligence there, and we were not, and he was criticizing himself and all the staff, and saying, there's something we missed there, because these people, of course, say, well, we will cash a lot for this, but how do we fail to put them a sense of responsibility of how the technology is so useful, absolutely so robust and so creative and so on, for common goals and for common uses and common purposes, and not for just making money for the next week or the next month and then moving back to another activity that doesn't make sense. That's a real issue. I completely agree. And that's why we should try to be much more strict and more high level of requirements on this kind of innovation. And the second point about the platforms, there's no follow-up and so on. You're absolutely right, because this is a kind of a solution that has been used as a communication device. They're just, well, we got it, we made it, we check it, okay, blah, blah, blah. Participative systems, okay, we did it, okay. What is the final evaluation, the final effect of that? Is benefit for the population and for the decision process? We don't care, we don't have time, because all the others are using it, so we'll do it. That's exactly a propagation of innovation just by imitation, doing it that way. And the problem is that when you want to build a system that is meaningful and really give a chance to the innovation to take place in the real situation that will address real concerns of people, you need to have this organizational design that I mentioned before, which means we will make as much money as we put in the technology, we will put it in the design of the processes, of the training of the people, of the consequences, assessing the consequences of that, and having a long-term evaluation and be sure that the system will deliver some results, some feedback, not necessarily satisfying, but at least they will have some feedback. We have experienced that in France with the contribution system developed by the government that was absolutely, and we are still now asking as researchers to use the data of many writings that have been done by what we call the Great Debate in France after the Gilets jaunes, and they are stockpiled in some warehouse, and we're still asking, requiring to use that and to interpret that with the technology, the language technology that we have. We are really able to do something interesting, but the people themselves, nothing get back from that, you know. And when you do that once, you do that twice, the third time people say, okay, I know what it means. I will not move nothing to help you in this process. You will not fool me. We won't get fooled again. Yeah. Perfect.
We have time maybe for 1, 2 more questions. Yeah.
It's so many ideas. I'm trying to get it into a single question. But when I was growing up, I remember that the consensus was still computers were stupid. And then it was IBM who built the Deep Blue, I think. That was the first computer that defeated Gary Kasparov. And since then, we've been growing and growing and growing on computing power. And since then, we have become used to throwing computing power at problems. I mean, instead of looking at problems in a more simple way, trying to find solutions that a mathematician would call elegant because they're more simple, we just use raw computing power to try and solve those problems. Yes, and that's what all these models of Google made me think about. Those large quantities of sensors put in everything. We're trying to get granularity down to what molecular level, and then put all those data into an algorithm that is not prepared to handle that much granularity, because it's going to give us different kinds of solutions, like traffic solutions, and it's going to send us in a different way that is not the best one, because it has been fed this granularity that makes it calculated a non-ideal solution. And I mean, you mentioned it when you said that when we defer to smart solutions, we become stupid. And I think that's what's been happening with all these new solutions that you mentioned. You mentioned these fake cities, for example. We are trying to build the ideal city because the cities that we have are very chaotic, and we're trying to build a city that is not chaotic. And last week we were talking about Nusantara, which is a new city in Indonesia, and Egypt is building a new city just outside of Cairo, because they're trying to fix the problems of their older cities, of Jakarta, of Cairo, and they're not going to do that, and they recognize that they're not going to do that. I mean, not everyone in Jakarta is going to move to Nusantara. Not everyone in Cairo is going to move to New Cairo. It's just the government who's going to move there. And all this money that governments are spending, this brute force, could have been spent in a new metro system, a new metro line for Cairo, which has 3 lines and 20 million people. And the quantity of money that is being spent in Nusantara, actually destroying the environment in Borneo, could be spent in solving the sinking problem of Jakarta and trying to move some of those people a little bit further inland in the same area, or building up, or some other solutions. I don't know if this actually this is kind of the path that your complex describes. from the old world, from the old experience, then to the experts, and then to the newer Google city, and then to a newer wiki system that will take into account all the stakeholders, not just like the need for profit, because of course somebody's profiting off of Santana, somebody's profiting off of New Cairo, and somebody profited off of Brasilia. And I don't know how you see that this trend might stop, because I see it actually accelerating. But how could we make this newer quadrant actually work and move away from this vaporware solutions like Neom and Santana and New Cairo?
Well, thank you. You're right. That's exactly the problem that we're facing now. I would say that one of the issues is the fact that what I call calculation is being disembedded, And I use exactly the term that Polanyi used for economics, economy and economics. He used that in order to make us understand that now we are thinking all the issues that we're facing in economical terms as if they were completely disembedded from the social, legal, and cultural stakes. That's what he explained how the Great Transformation in his book of 1947, but he explained in the 19th century there has been a large trend to detach economy from other embedments, trying to make it as if there were models. Of course, we are able to build models the moment you get rid of every feature that is trying to make the system too complex. So of course you make models that looks like they work, But in the end, when you get them applied in reality, that's awful. So that's what exactly Polanyi did, and that's exactly what we're facing with the calculation. Calculation capacities, as you said, are tremendous, but if they are completely disembedded from the social, legal, ethical requirements, and even commercial ones, but the problem is that now they are completely embedded within specific commercial ones, and financial, more than commercial, financial. And the problem is that if you don't, you're really in trouble, because all the capacities that are really technology for all my life, and I liked it. I adopted all the new tech ones. I tested it. No, the problem is that when you do that, it's not enough. You need to be sure that it will benefit a large part of the population first, and it will leave you some room for initiative, creativity, decision making, or not just being in a position of being dependent and completely trapped into that. And so that's why the problem. How do we obtain that? I think one of the features at my level is that what I try to do, either for the social scientists that I train or the computer scientists that I train, because I used to train a lot of computer scientists in schools, is to make them aware of that. Saying, no, you must complete your training by the other aspect of it, and hybrid people, that are able to discuss with the data scientists when you are in social science. And not just saying, well, we take what is on the shelf, and that's it, or we just criticize without knowing what is inside, So we need to have this hybrid training. And on the other side, for the data scientists, we need, that's what I did in many schools, put them a lot of social science, cultural learning about how the society themselves have been built, and how it is important for them to have this understanding of how it works. And one critical point on that is the fact that we need to make them accept that, as you said, people are not rational. I think it's a different kind of rationality. That's all. It's not the rationality as the goal-oriented system. It's the fact, for instance, that debating controversies, having a kind of contradictory attitude, this is something that is the basis of our livable societies, I mean, democracies, which is related on the contradictory views in media, in legal systems, research, and whatever you want, you'll find it everywhere. If you are not able to train these people who are designing the systems, that this is very important. This is a key feature of all the situations that we are experiencing in order to solve really complex issues. Well, we are completely out of the target. And this is really, you must understand that this is not really the basic understanding. You have problems that have solutions, and sometimes you have solutions. You don't have problems, but that's not a problem. You will sell it, whatever, and you don't get into the debate, into the attitude. And AI is very bad at getting into controversies, The only way that they manage to do that is saying, well, some people say that, some others say that, okay, thank you, bye-bye, and that's it. No, you need to have an argumentation and being able to assess the weight of each of the stakeholders and to make room for their own opinions and visions and projects and so on. It's so complex, that's something I learned when I was training in the United States in Berkeley, and my computer scientist used to say to me, no, when we addressed the kind of issue, they said, well, no, it's full of sociology. And that's it. So that, at the moment they said that, it means that they don't want to get into that. It's full of sociology, and that's the only justification of why they did not address some situation. It's full of sociology. And the problem now, the only interest of computation is to address real significant social issues. We don't need to make the system work for itself, and invent justifications for. Now, how can we justify 6G, for instance? How can we justify? I mean, you know why? You know what? They are justifying it because we all averse, we are expecting, desiring holograms everywhere. That's exactly the fantasies that are being built. Their imagination is that holograms for every activity everywhere, and that's the happiness. With the happy world that we are providing us, anticipating. We don't care who needs holograms, for specific issues in some specific situation. Okay, but redesigning the whole communication system, investing a huge amount of money for purposes, and that's really how they get disembedded, because they cannot get just completely disembedded, so they have to invent an imagination to justify the investment, But the problem is that the end doesn't make sense, It doesn't make sense. What would we solve for all the problem of water management systems here in Mexico? Okay, you can have 3D modelization. Yes, we do have, and it's useful, provided that it's very targeted for a specific use with the expertise of the people that are involved in the field, adapted to that, but not just for generalizing that to everything, in the room. And just for Jakarta, you must know that there is a system that is called Peta Jakarta, which is quite interesting because this is the other part of the answer. There are always people who are inventing systems that are not in the same track as the financial, immediately fast return and short-term business. They are trying to invent systems that will create system of alerts. You may have something related to that in Mexico, but there it's for floods, and trying to make people aware of that. And they build a whole system with a local contribution, with contribution of people and so on. So there is a room for innovations that are really used for the common good, How can we help governments understand that and not put all the money in the really fantasies of the engineers or of the companies that sell that, and try to make kind of wiki city finance with subsiding that as well? That's a part of the solution. Peta Jakarta.
Unfortunately, we've run out.
Sorry, I talked too much.
No, not at all. Perhaps we have time for one very small question. See? No. Or you can talk later.
Yeah, okay.
See? Okay. All right.
Too bad.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Dominique. Thank you all for being here. It was a pleasure having you here. And thank you all for commenting, sharing, asking, and so on. So we will announce when our next seminar will be as soon as
hospital.
Thank you very much. Exactly. Gracias. Oh, but that's the whole point. No, the whole point is to ask and to hear you. No, yes. No, it's here. Why would I have a lot of questions. But I'll tell you now. No, I'm the moderator. I can't forget. Yeah, yeah, and I'm very curious. No, but I do, I have, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks.
I need to do the exam.
I'm sorry.